Poker's greatest tournament run? That sounds hype.
A standard deck of playing cards can be arranged in a number of ways. In fact, that exact number happens to be 52 factorial, which can otherwise be—
We just watched the whole video on how gambling is bad, and now we're gonna watch a video on how poker's great. It's called fair and balanced. You need to see both sides. Never accuse me of swaying the vote one way or another. I'm going to give you a fair and balanced take.
Expressed like this, or in standard notation, like this. It's a number so astronomically huge that it would take me a minute to even pronounce the whole thing. The scale of it is mind-boggling, far beyond anything we can hope to visualize with our human frame of reference. It doesn't really make sense how this unfathomable quantity manages to fit neatly inside such a simple man-made object. Depending on how you look at it, a deck of cards might as well contain all the possibilities in the universe. The whims of chance are as tantalizing as they are confounding, something that exists just beyond the realm of our control. If you manage to achieve total mastery over the odds, you could basically do anything you wanted. Anyone who somehow harnessed this elusive power would suddenly gain access to unlimited possibilities. You could dodge bullets, hit every green light, and never lose at Monopoly again. But if we're being honest, you and I both know exactly—
I love going with green Simpsons so you don't get flagged. We need that for Shark Tank Reacts. We need to make green Mark Cuban so we can upload more of the episode.
They'd immediately go out and buy a winning lottery ticket, hit a 25-way parlay, and dump everything else into tomorrow's best performing stock.
Nice.
Because if there's one thing people love to imagine themselves doing, it's getting rich. When given one shot at a lucky streak, the best we could hope to do with it would be to make some serious money. Allow me to introduce you to the star of our story. His name is Chris Moneymaker.
Wait, can I say there's something true to that? Because I've been doing this icebreaker hypothetical, and you can feel free to steal this. I've been doing this icebreaker hypothetical at group events where I ask, you can go into a time machine and go back to any year, and when you come out, you're the richest person in the world for that year. Forever. You're the richest person in the world for that time period. How far back can you go before it's not worth it and you'd rather stay in your own time? It's a good question. So if you go back to, like, I don't know, caveman times, it's terrible, right? Even if you're the richest person, it's way worse than your regular life now. But even if you're like a medieval king, really your life is relatively boring compared to now, and you have worse healthcare and worse food access. So what most people do is they start out really early and they think about it and they end up saying like the 1990s or the 2000s. Because before that, you don't even have internet, and there is always in every group at least one person who's like, I would go back to the year 1980 and invest in Apple. And it's like, bro, the entire point of the question is you're already the richest person in the world. There's no money to be gained. But that's the first, they can't even help themselves.
Yes, that is his real name. It is believed to have descended from the German name Nurmacher, belonging to distant relatives who manufactured silver and gold coins. Chris would end up working with money in his own right, earning a modest living as an—
Obviously, as a millennial dude, my version of what you guys have with XQC and Aiden Ross is this guy. I am well aware of Chris Moneymaker's legendary poker run. It caused many people my age to lose a bunch of fucking money trying to play poker. As I did when I lived in Korea, I tried to become a professional poker hustler and I lost a bunch of money. Classic coming of age tale for millennial men. So I know this story, but I'm excited to hear it retold from this perspective.
Accountant for a local restaurant chain. His life was average in just about every way, until one fateful evening when everything took an unexpected turn. The story of Chris Moneymaker began with what most of you are probably doing right now, staring at a screen while trying to kill some time.
Caught!
The year was 2003, and online poker had taken America by storm. While the game of poker in one form or another had existed for centuries, its popularity didn't really take off until the advent of one specific variant.
Rounders!
The name of the game is No Limit Hold'em, where players have to make the most out of 5 community cards and just 2 hole cards, which are unknown to the rest of the table. Like all the best games, Hold'em is easy to understand and difficult to master, but what makes it rather unique is its delicate balance between luck and skill. A game like chess, for example, is entirely skill-based. The outcome is determined entirely by the strategic mastery of the player. There is really no other way to win besides outplaying your opponent heads up. This leads to fair but predictable results in competitive
Oh, there's another way to win.
play, where the winner almost always comes down to the better player. On the opposite side of the spectrum, you have a game like slots, whose outcome is entirely dependent on luck. The player is fully at the mercy of chance, with no way to gain any sort of strategic edge. There is no real difference between new and experienced players, since everyone has equal odds at hitting the jackpot. In slots, anyone can win, but no one has any control over whether they do. And then, somewhere in the middle, you have poker. A shuffled deck of cards may seem as random as a slot machine, but with enough practice and game sense, skilled players do manage to gain an edge over the competition. That edge is achieved through America's favorite pastime, lying.
It's annoying because, the optimal video game spot for this to be is right here to make money. For fun, it's like right here, and for money, it's right here. And so all game developers are going right here. Just enough skill so you feel some expression and don't get bored and you can like feel like you're getting some mastery, but mostly luck. And then League is here, but League is a dying breed. The games of the future are all here. Only RNG and League is your teammates. Yeah, but even that, I mean, over time, you guys are not in ELO hell. I hate to break it to you. I hate to break it to you. You're exactly where you fucking belong. All right, your skill is accurately measured. They designed the way you play Call of Duty Black Ops around slot machines. The idea that you spawn and you get some kills for free because you're just behind somebody, you shoot them in the back of the head, and you're always getting that dopamine reward. It's literally designed to be like a slot machine. It's like they want it to be, there's some skill of course, but you can play absolute ass and you just get a bunch of reward. It's mostly luck. There's not as many games over here. The ones that are over here are stuck here for life.
You have poker. A shuffled deck of cards may seem as random as a slot machine, but with enough practice and game sense, skilled players do manage to gain an edge over the competition. That edge is achieved through America's favorite pastime, lying. You see, poker is ultimately a game of information. The advantage exists in gathering information about your opponent's cards while concealing your own. Information can be communicated through betting. Typically, a big bet is supposed to represent a strong hand, but that's not always the case. Since you can never be certain about your opponent's cards, there is always an opportunity for deception. The technique of bluffing allows poker players to overcome losing hands by pretending to have something stronger. Understanding precisely when to bluff adds a layer of skill and complexity to an otherwise random game. In poker, the best player doesn't always win, but if you play your cards right, you can still stand a fighting chance even when the odds aren't in your favor.
And have you ever had the experience of playing poker with like family members and there's no stakes at all? And so the game has no purpose and everyone's just getting dealt cards and then going, and it's like an entirely waste of time. But if you bring it up, then you're the weirdo that wants to like make it serious. And now you're ruining family fun night and you need to just go back to your computer and go back to your room. Not speaking from experience.
Throughout his life, Chris Moneymaker never saw himself as anything more than an amateur player. His only action came from various low-stakes online rooms. Compared to the competition, he was above average, often winning more than he lost. But one day in April 2003, he finds himself on the run of his life. It all started with an $86 buy-in to an online tournament on the site PokerStars.com.
I did not know this.
After several hours, he is one of the final 4 players remaining. By now, Chris had participated in dozens of these events, but he never come this close to winning. Unfortunately, this just so happens to be a tournament he's not trying to win. His initial plan is to flame out in 4th place and collect the $8,000 cash prize to pay off some credit card debt. That's because the grand prize of this tournament is a little unorthodox. Rather than a cash payout, the top 3 finishers will be given a free ticket to the World Series of Poker main event, otherwise known as the most prestigious tournament in all of poker. Chris reasonably concludes that his chances of finishing in the money at such an event would be slim to none, and prepares for the far more sensible option of taking the money right in front of him.
That's funny.
However, in the heat of the moment, he stops to reconsider his options. While he really wants to cash out, his friends and family are far more excited about the alternative. After mulling it over for a bit, they eventually convince him to answer the call to adventure, under one condition.
Fix it.
Unwilling to leave so much money on the table, Chris wants some insurance. His World Series ticket is equivalent to a $10,000 price of admission, and he intends to sell off some of that equity. His father offers him $2,000 in cash for a 20% stake, But Chris is not exactly sold yet. Before going through with it, he needs a little more investment from a friend who was willing to take a gamble. His name is Dave Gamble. I
Chris
swear I'm not
Moneymaker
making
and
any
Dave
of this up.
Gamble.
It all sounds absurd, I know, but it's not as unusual as you may think. Another interesting quirk of probability is that eventually, strange coincidences are bound to happen. On very rare occasions, order emerges from chaos, and one spring day in 2003, a man named Moneymaker and a man named Gamble walked into a casino.
That's crazy.
Do you think they were feeling lucky?
This shit gets me. I want to play poker right now.
A poker tournament will inevitably guide the player to one of two outcomes. You either end up with no chips or all of the chips. The 2003 main event featured a record-setting field of 839 competitors, each beginning with a chip stack of 10,000. In the next 5 days, there will be just one player left standing, holding on to the entire supply of 8.39 million. The reward for this monumental task is a payday of $2.5 million. So, if you want to become the champion, you gotta start taking
You can't cash
people's
out early.
chips. A job that's easier said than done. In poker, you lose chips just by sitting at the table. The system of blinds and antes puts each player on a timer. If you just sit around waiting, your stack will gradually bleed out into nothing. The only way to increase your chip count is to start winning hands, which cannot be done without putting your own chips at risk. Eventually, the design of the game forces you into making aggressive decisions in order to
I remember the first time I played in Vegas, I was so nervous. I had just turned 21. I got a Heineken, my first beer at Vegas. And I'm sitting there and I'm folding and folding and folding. And then I got pocket kings and I got so excited. I was like trying to play it cool and I knock over my beer. And the dude next to me goes, well, I know what he has, and folds. I felt so shitty. And then I just folded around and I collected the blinds. I got nothing for it.
The only problem is that it's hard to be aggressive when you're going face to face with the best in the world. Unlike other prestigious competitions, the WSOP main event is peculiar in being open to the public. It doesn't matter if you just learned how to play on the cab ride over. As long as you pay the price of admission, you have a seat at the table with the masters of the game. It's the equivalent of driving your car onto the grid of the Indy 500.
That'd be hype.
But make no mistake about it, poker's elite are more than...
It always shocks me how many people enter the World Series of Poker because it costs 10 grand, which is not a small amount of money. And everyone knows they're going to lose. Almost everybody knows they're going to lose. It's pretty shocking. They get a ton of entrants. The prize pool is huge. I don't know. It's just, I'm surprised. I always thought it would be fewer people, but it's a lot of people.
happy to welcome a bunch of amateurs to the party. To them, it's like letting in more minnows to the Shark Tank. As Chris Moneymaker arrived at his table on day one of competition, he's certainly feeling like fresh meat. His goal at this point is to simply survive until day 2. Just an hour into the game, he's already encountered his first roadblock, a player by the name of Jim Worth, better known by his screen name Crazy Canuck. Chris immediately recognizes him as a powerful foe from his online games. It's not long before the Crazy Canuck sees Chris as an easy target. He starts playing Chris more aggressively and taking his chips. Eventually, Chris realizes that he won't survive for long as the weak link, so he starts fighting back. After flexing some muscle with a few big bets, he gets his rival to back off, taking some pots in the process.
Nice.
By the end of the afternoon, he's actually up a few thousand chips and feeling pretty good about himself. Players are busting out of the tournament already and he's sitting on a decent cushion. After studying the other players at the table, he likes his chances. He's got everyone else mostly figured out, except for one fellow, an older gentleman in a green polo. Chris doesn't recognize him until he looks over at the side of the venue and sees his picture on the wall. All this time, Chris had been playing alongside the 1995 champion Dan Harrington, and he didn't even know it. The realization was a stark reminder that he was still very much out of his depth, and that in this tournament, threats are lurking around every corner.
The art's cool.
But after this moment, something interesting happens. Chris gets moved to a different table and starts running hot. He picks up several strong hands, makes a few good calls, and all of a sudden finds himself behind a stack of 60,000 chips. In fact, he wraps up day 1 in 11th place overall. He's in such good shape
Phil Ivey, that's my goat. That's my poker goat. I used to watch Phil Ivey clips on the fucking bus in Korea. Phil Ivey's so sick, dude.
that he can actually sleep well that night. Unfortunately, he ends up sleeping a little too well. The next morning, Chris wakes up to a horrifying sight. He has overslept the beginning of day 2. While frantically rushing to the casino floor, he assumes that he's just been disqualified, throwing away the single biggest opportunity of his life. When he gets down to the tables, people wonder what he's so worked up about. He then notices his stack of chips waiting for him at an open seat. Turns out all that panic was just another rookie mistake. Chris eventually settles back into the game and seems to pick back up where he left off. He's able to capitalize off his chip advantage and bully some weaker players off their hands, even knocking some opponents out of the tournament. After several hours, he's built his stack up to 180,000. However, this surge of momentum changes course when 2 new players arrive at the table. One of them is Phil Ivey, who is regarded today as possibly the greatest poker player in history.
The GOAT!
The other is Johnny Chan, who at this time is poker's biggest celebrity. The 2-time main event champion was iconic enough to show up in Hollywood movies, and was one of the only players.
This is this scene from Rounders. Rounders is a poker movie with Matt Damon. Kind of iconic in the poker world. It's a little cheesy, but it's fun. The whole movie, Matt Damon, he's like a young poker hustler. He's like, I want to prove I can play with the big dogs. Like one day I want to prove I can make it with the big dogs. The end of the movie, he goes to Vegas. He plays against Johnny Chan. He wins one hand, and he walks away like he's the GOAT. Johnny just Johnny just gets fucking bad cards or folds. It's like so stupid. It's like in poker, the only way to be better than someone is to beat him over thousands and thousands of hands. Each individual hand means nothing. And it isn't even like Johnny Chan like loses a bunch of money. Like he raises, he folds. And then he walks away like, yeah, I got him beat.
That Chris immediately recognized. Just as soon as they appear, they start cleaning him out. No matter what he tries, Chris is simply no match for the pros. They're just too intimidating and too aggressive for him to get any sort of edge. By the end of the day, Ivey and Chan have drained his stack down to just over 100,000. The setback knocks him down to 26th place in the standings. Although he's losing ground on the leaders, Chris is still holding his own. By the end of day 2, there are just over 100 players left in the tournament. If he can hang on for one more day, then he's actually on pace to finish in the money. But surviving at this stage in the tournament is easier said than done. By now, the cream has risen to the top, and the pool of unskilled opponents has dried up. No matter where he lands tomorrow, he's going to be swimming with the sharks.
Day 3.
Day 3 of the tournament begins with another complication for Chris. He manages to wake up on time, but now he's having trouble finding his table. After searching for a while, he has to stop and ask one of the organizers, who points all the way down to the end of the venue, past a crowd of spectators and into the center of a bunch of lights and cameras. Chris had been assigned to the TV table.
One more man I have to mention before we get underway at our featured table. His name is Chris Moneymaker.
As if the situation couldn't get any more nerve-wracking, his seat is sandwiched between a murderer's row of poker pros. Joining him at the table are Paul Darden, Howard Lederer, and a familiar foe in Johnny Chan. When the action begins, Chris is too afraid to play a hand. He's almost mesmerized watching the clash of poker titans in front of him. He remarks at how effortlessly they toss their chips into the pot, as if the huge amounts of money they're throwing around are of no concern to them. These are the true high rollers of the game, playing next to an average Joe who's never taken home more than 40 grand in a year. Chris figures that he might as well use this opportunity to study the masters. He tries to get in their head and understand how they think. After several hands of staring down the pros, he notices a couple of them are staring back. He imagines it's some kind of mind game, a spontaneous test of will to see if he's truly worthy of being in their presence. This sublime moment is eventually broken when Johnny Chan speaks up to remind Chris that it's his turn. When he realizes what happened, he just about turns red. Chris got so caught up in his own head that he forgot to fold his cards. His most humiliating blunder of the tournament, and it was all caught on camera. He had just exposed himself as the biggest fish at the table. His only saving grace is that the broadcast is on tape delay, and that the debacle may not end up airing. Johnny Chan tries to reassure him that a gaffe like that will never see the light of day. Unless, of course, he wins. At this moment, something changed within Chris Moneymaker. While many others would have crumbled under the embarrassment, Chris ended up responding to the situation in an unexpected way. He feels oddly relaxed, like he has nothing left to fear. He starts to realize that his lack of experience offers him a unique advantage. He may be a no-name player, but that also makes him an X-Factor. After spending the whole tournament in their shadow, he begins to turn the tables on the pros.
Ooh.
A few hands later, Chris goes head-to-head with Howard Lederer. He gets dealt a pair of aces, the strongest opening hand in the game, and recognizes that now is the time to strike. After a few rounds of betting, Moneymaker shoves all in. Lederer has him covered in chips, meaning that if Chris loses, he's out of the tournament. Lederer thinks for a while and ultimately decides to fold, allowing Chris to collect a nice pot. It started to look like the momentum was back on Chris's side.
Just get
a
aces,
trend that
that
became
easy.
apparent after his showdown with Johnny Chan. Ever since the stare down, Chan had been struggling, and his situation was starting to get desperate. Just before the dinner break, Moneymaker gets dealt an ace-8 of hearts and decides he wants to tangle with the master. By now, the other players have exited the table, leaving only the challenger and the champion.
Oh, damn.
The flop comes with 2 hearts and an ace, putting Moneymaker in great shape. After Chan raises him, he decides to shove all in.
Okay.
Chan makes the call, putting his tournament life at risk. He turns over the King 5 of hearts. Moneymaker jumps out of his seat. He has Chan dominated, with 87% odds to win the hand. Just one other card is all it takes to seal the deal.
Let's
Chris
go!
Moneymaker had just busted the most famous player in the tournament.
I sat with the best in the world. And I won.
All of a sudden, this unsuspecting accountant from
That's the
Tennessee
scene.
had stumbled into the script of a Hollywood movie. Through all the commotion, he secured a spot in the top 45, good enough for a payout of at least $25,000. However, for the first time in the tournament, Chris starts to set his sights on something greater. By the end of day 3, he's sitting on 357,000 chips,
Phil Hellmuth,
good
Scotty
enough
Wynn.
for 6th place overall. If he can maintain his
Phil Hellmuth, later famous for losing money to Ninja. Truly is poker peak.
7,000 chips, good enough for 6th place overall. If he can maintain his position for one more day of action, he's on pace to make the final table, where the prize money gets truly life-changing. By day 4 of the main event, the demeanor of the room is noticeably different. The pleasantries of small talk and friendly banter have been replaced with an air of tension and unease. At this point, the players can no longer ignore what's at stake. From here on out, there's no more friends, no more patience, and no more room for error. In the next 48 hours, a champion will be crowned, and everyone has their eyes on the prize. After knocking out Johnny Chan, Chris Moneymaker is now on everybody's radar, and the pros are eager to prove that his hot streak is nothing more than a lucky break. His first challenge comes from Umberto Brenes, otherwise known as the Shark. After a couple of big bets, Brenes lures Chris into shoving all in with just a pair of 8s. When Chris sees him turn over aces, he knows he's in trouble. Brenes has him almost dead to rights, with a 92% chance of taking the pot.
Is he gonna get an
However, Moneymaker's luck hasn't run out yet.
Here comes a turn,
That's
and
f***ed
an 8 of
That's f***ed up. Umberto should have been the one, dude.
clubs. The last card is no help to Brenes, and he has
That
been
sucks for him.
eliminated.
Damn, that's gotta hurt.
Remarkably, Moneymaker gets bailed out by an
To get all your money in so good. Final day of the main event to get that far, to get all your money in so good. Guy flips a fucking 8, some fucking chump accountant. Oh, I would have fucking lost it.
unlikely set of 8s that sends the Shark packing. This moment is a huge wake-up call for Chris, who understands that he just dodged a bullet. The spectacle certainly hasn't helped him shake the perception of a lucky amateur, but as the day goes on, he actually begins to prove his worth. Howard Lederer is the
doghoused.
next pro to go after Chris, confronting him with another all-in bet. This time, Chris makes the right call and lays down his cards. After that, he gets involved with the 1998 champion Scotty Nguyen. Chris immediately makes another correct read and bluffs him off his hand. After stealing a pot from one of the best in the world, Moneymaker decides to take things a bit further. Facing off against French millionaire Chuck Huang, he pulls off another bluff, and this time shows his cards to the table. His rivals are shocked to see that Chris had been holding absolute junk. For the first time, the other players are finally starting to see him as a credible threat. Halfway through the action, Chris is down to the final 22, and remains in 6th place on the leaderboard. The final table is looking more and more likely, but he still has plenty of foes standing in his way. Chris's next showdown would come against Dutch Boyd, another young gun who'd spent most of the afternoon with the chip lead. As the story goes, he had grown up as some kind of boy genius, earning his master's in law at just the age of 18. As fate would have it, he would end up using his profound intellect to play cards for a living. He spent the whole tournament outsmarting the competition, until he ends up face to face with Chris Moneymaker. Chris jumps in the action with a pair of 3s. The flop is a bunch of low cards, which improve his odds a bit, so he bets. Dutch stares him down for a while, and then raises all in. Chris is now slated with his toughest decision of the tournament. If he makes the call and he's wrong, it's game over. A pair of 3s is far from the best hand. There are many other combinations of cards that outright beat it here. Chris thinks for a long time. He considers all the different angles and possibilities.
That's a snap fold. I feel like that's a snap fold, but maybe I don't have the fucking heart of the cards, dude.
But at the end of it all, he just doesn't buy the story. Moneymaker calls and Dutch is beside himself. He's been caught out on a stone-cold bluff. The next 2 cards are no help for him, and Chris doubles up to 1.2 million chips. Dutch asks him if he exploited some kind of hidden tell. He doesn't believe that a player like him could have possibly made such a read. Chris simply responds that he had a gut feeling. Oftentimes in poker, instincts matter more than intellect. Moments later, Dutch Boyd is knocked out of the tournament in 12th place.
Damn.
And before long, Chris has survived into the top 10, one spot away from the final table. This is where the competition reaches a bottleneck. For the pros, making the final table is a point of pride, and no one wants to be the odd man out. The game slows to a crawl as every player tightens up. The stalemate extends well past midnight. Chris has now been playing poker for over 13 hours straight.
Jesus.
Under the mounting exhaustion, he's trying his best to weather the storm, until he sees an opportunity. Starting with ace-queen, Chris hits a set on the flop. After an unsuspecting 9 on the turn, he likes his chances and bets big. He would have felt even better if he wasn't challenging Phil Ivey, the most dangerous player left in the field. Immediately, he proves why that's the case and raises all in. Chris makes the call, and to his horror, Ivey turns over a pair of 9s. With a pair of queens already on the board, it's good for a full house, blowing Chris's hand away. His odds of winning have plummeted to just 17%. Ivey did everything right, and provided another reminder of why many consider him to be the best to ever play.
Yeah, I'll play.
In the future, he'll go on to win dozens of tournaments, but as fate would have it, this was not one of them.
No fucking way. No fucking way. That's so annoying. With no skill. What a plot armor. What an insane bailout. Holy God. Phil Ivey got his money in so good. Yet again, it's not even a coin flip. It's not like a 50-50. It's like an 87. That's crazy.
An incredible knockout
That's
blow.
crazy.
Probably the best player left in the tournament.
The river card is an ace,
Bro, Phil Ivey should have won this tournament.
giving Moneymaker a superior full house. Ivey is out of the tournament in 10th place, and Chris has advanced to the final table as the overall chip leader. An amateur player who just a month ago was stressing out over $8,000 is now in prime position to take home $2.5 million.
Sheesh.
Thus far, it's been a great story, inspirational even, but if we're being realistic, this has to be the part where we step out of Neverland. He's made some great plays, toppled some of the best in the game, and even seems to have luck on his side. But at some point, Chris's inexperience is gonna come back to bite him, and he's gonna get beat. His best course of action now should be to coast off his lead, enjoy the ride, and wait for the inevitable. However, the man named Moneymaker has other plans. The law of large numbers states that after enough trials, everything eventually regresses to the mean. 4 days ago, Chris had never set foot in a real-life poker tournament, and now finds himself leading the most important event of the year. He's about as big of a statistical outlier as they come. In all this time, everyone has been waiting for the other shoe to drop on the online fish. But for as long as the pros have believed this, Chris has continued to pick them off one by one. He starts the final day of competition by knocking out David Gray. A while later, he takes out Tomer Benveniste, followed by Jason Lester, bringing Moneymaker into the top 3.
That's crazy.
The next one to fall is Dan Harrington, the original Spectre who haunted him all the way back at his very first table. And with that, Chris Moneymaker had only one player left to beat. His final opponent is Sam Farha, who resembles the dictionary definition of a poker professional. Cunning, unflappable, and visibly richer than you. Chris has come face to face with his complete antithesis, a seasoned veteran who's finally gonna put the scrappy underdog in his place. There's a break in the action before the final showdown as the tournament organizers remind everyone what they're fighting for. They wheel out $2.5 million in cold hard cash and dump it on the
badass.
table. Few people in history have ever been in the presence of that much physical money. It's enough dough that Chris can literally smell it. The moment snaps him back to reality. He'd been so dialed into the game that he forgot what was at stake. And for the first time in a while, Chris thinks about playing it safe. During the break, he runs into Sam Farha in the restroom and tries to cut a deal. He wants to split the first and second place purse 50-50 and just play for the trophy. Since Chris has about a 2-to-1 chip advantage, he considers it a generous offer. Farha, however, disagrees. He doesn't see Chris as an equal opponent and wants a greater share of the winnings.
Oh, shit!
For as far as he's come, the others still don't think he deserves to be there. To truly earn their respect, Chris has to go out and prove himself once and for all. The championship battle rages back and forth. After 90 minutes of action, neither player has been able to get an edge. That all changes on the 27th hand of the showdown. As the cards are dealt, both players fire into the pot. Chris has King 7, and after the turn card has both a straight and a flush draw. Sensing an opportunity, he bets big. The river card comes, and it's a total brick. Chris misses on both of his draws and is hung out to dry with just King High. He thinks for a bit, and then does the unthinkable. Moneymaker shoves all in with absolute junk. Farha has him beat with a pair of 9s. He has a golden opportunity to double up and put Chris in a nearly insurmountable deficit. All he has to do is make the call. Farha stares Chris down, scanning for any sort of inconsistency. Moneymaker has gone still as a statue. For the next minute, he doesn't move a muscle. After an excruciating wait, Farha lays down. Chris has just off the bluff of the century. On the very hand, he flops 2 pair and catches Sammy on a pair of jacks. Farha moves all in and Moneymaker calls. After 2 more cards, it's all over.
No way. No way. Farha was 1 call away and then instant knocked out. Jeez Louise.
With a full house, Chris Moneymaker eliminates Sam Farha, and in a very swift and unlikely manner is atop the poker world.
When he finally looked over his domain, he wept, for there were no more worlds to conquer.
Okay.
The 2003 World Series of Poker main event belongs to Chris Moneymaker. He finishes out his run with a tournament-winning full house. In his first ever live event, he walks out of the casino a multi-millionaire. In the words of ESPN commentator Norman Chad,
This is beyond fairy tale. It's inconceivable.
amidst the celebration, poker vets Mike Matusow and Eric Seidel
The number of men who would lose money because of that win were millions more. The number of people that look like Chris Moneymaker that was like, oh, I could do it too. Wow, it's the perfect dream.
are discussing what just transpired. Matusow is distraught, believing that the air of legitimacy around poker pros had just been dismantled. If a guy like Moneymaker could come in and beat the best in the world, what would that say about the industry as a whole? Seidel, on the other hand, sees things more pragmatically. He suggests that they donate Chris 5% of their future earnings, because the world of poker was about to change forever. Several months later, the tournament would air on ESPN, marking the beginning of what came to be known as the Moneymaker effect. The program drew in record viewership for televised poker, prompting the network to re-air the special nearly a dozen times. It turned out that the American public found Chris's story to be quite inspirational. People became enamored by the idea of raking in millions by playing cards for a few days. Just 1 year later, the WSOP main event saw triple the entrants. The poker boom was underway, as everyone tried to become the next Chris Moneymaker. In the following decades, this influx of new players would end up earning the poker industry billions. However, the great irony with all of this is that for the part he played in it, Chris didn't actually walk away with that much money. Remember that steak he sold to his friends and family? Well, he had to make good on that promise. For his $2,000 share, Mike Moneymaker went on to pocket $500,000. And as for Dave's gamble, he turned his $2,500 wager into $625,000. That would have still left Chris with a nice chunk of change. But as it turned out, Mrs. Moneymaker got more than she bargained for when her husband started traveling the world to play poker for a living. The two would end up splitting, and most of the remaining prize money would leave with her.
Yikes.
Chris may not have been left with much of a fortune, but he did have fame. The folks at PokerStars greatly appreciated the free promotion he'd given them, and agreed to cover the costs of any event he wanted to enter. Needless to say, this new career path was certainly a step up from accounting. At the end of it all, Chris had found his true calling in life, and as time went on, it became apparent that his magical run may not have been such a fluke after all. Soon enough, he would prove himself as quite a natural at the game, and as of 2024, he's still winning tournaments.
Damn!
It's now been over 20 years since Chris Moneymaker changed poker forever.
That's kind of hype.
If you catch him at the right time,
I always thought he was a fluke.
You can still see him trying his luck at the place where it all began. This year's main event featured more than 10,000 entrants competing for a grand prize of $10 million.
That could be us, chat. That could be us. Let's all put in $10,000 each and go enter the World Series of Poker. We could win big. We just gotta get lucky.
Today, the game is certainly different than the one Moneymaker came into. Many would agree that modern poker lacks much of the mystique and wonder that once made it so entertaining. The colorful cast of characters from the past have slowly been phased out by a new generation of players who prefer a more robotic and analytical approach to the game. With the rise of computers and poker engines, everyone now understands the statistically optimal way to play. After all this,
dude, the real thing that fucks it that nobody talks about, poker is a game, much like chess, where bots are very good and often and really better than people. There's Russian networks of bots that are running on every poker website that are actually just farming people for money at all levels of skill, especially any limit area. Bots crush in limit where the bets are. It's all covered up and no one talks about it because it's such a lucrative industry and poker stars know what to do and they pretend they have a handle on it. But I mean, it's just too easy to do and there's too much money at stake. You know, you could literally have an app tell you what to do, you know, with a bot and then use it yourself as a human. It's like there's too few moves. It's not like, you know. So if you're playing online poker, you should quit legitimately. You are in a losing game. No matter how good you think you are in a losing game.
This time, we're still trying to master the odds. But no matter how advanced your strategy is, no one really
play
controls
doghouse
their
yet.
destiny.
Yeah, exactly.
Whenever you shuffle a deck of cards, there's an astronomically high chance that the combination you hold in your hands has never existed before in history. The universe is full of possibilities, a few of which will lead us towards strange and beautiful surprises, to things far more valuable than money. When you think about all the cards that had to fall exactly right for the story to turn out this way, it's hard to believe it really happened. Of course, there are those who'll tell you that there's no such thing as chance. Events either happen or they don't. As far as we're concerned, the probability is either 0 or 100. The other numbers are just there to make our unknowable future feel a bit less murky. Life is a lot more unpredictable than we'd often like to admit, and sometimes it's incredible what can happen when you no longer fear the odds.
Yeah, and get really lucky. Fire video, fire story. Definitely something I remember fondly. It was a fun era. Though I did go to Korea and lose plenty of cash. The moral of the story is go gamble, you'll win big.